What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I wanted to show you how I care for my Ficus revoluta. Now, the only kind of common name that I've heard this plant called is the Sago Palm. I've also heard it called the King Sago, and coincidentally there is also a Queen Sago too, but those are two different plants. But this is actually a misnomer, kind of like its cousin, well, not actually its cousin, but the ponytail palm. That's not actually a palm either, that is a succulent. This is not a palm. This is actually what's called a cycad. And the cycads have been around for a millennia, for a long time. And this plant, this particular plant right here, has been around forever. Mine, I've had him for about 3 or 4 years, but these guys predate the dinosaurs of around 280 million years. I don't mean that they predated about 280 million years, but these Sago palms have been around since around the Jurassic, the Cretaceous periods, around 280 million years. And for good reason. These guys have a lot of protection and a lot of armor on them, so they don't fall victim to a lot of pests or a lot of predators or anything of that nature. So they're actually really protected plants. They have a stout, hard kind of cone or trunk, and it does have a lot of just individual pieces that come off to a point that can poke you. And then their leaves are really erect and stout and hard, and the leaf tips are kind of pointed. So they are really protected plants, and they're able to care for themselves and actually protect themselves from a lot of predators or a lot of pests. And so they've been around for a long time. Coincidentally, cycads are their own group, so they're not really palms, as I was saying. And what makes a cycad is that they do have a stout, kind of thick trunk, and then they have a fibrous, kind of hard, thick leaves that are kind of erect and hard to kind of break off too. Now these will produce cones, but if grown indoors, they rarely ever fruit or produce any kind of cones at all. And I believe another way that kind of separates them from other plants is that the seeds are actually out in the open. Other plants will have their seeds kind of enveloped and protected, but the seeds that grow on any kind of cycads are kind of out there for the world and the environment to kind of see or get at too. But be careful, any part of this plant is actually toxic. If you have any pets or you have any kids running around or anybody that likes to kind of put things in their mouth, this plant is toxic to people and to dogs and to cats. I've heard other growers say that birds will come in and eat the seeds, but I do know that if your dogs or your cats or your little ones come in and chew on it, any part of the plant, there can be problems. So make sure you don't have this around where other little ones will get a hold of it and start chewing on individual pieces or leaves or bark or roots or anything of that nature, because it can make somebody sick and potentially kill them as well. And as I was saying, superficially, they kind of look like palm trees. They have this erect trunk, and then they have these leaves that kind of unfurl almost like a fern does. If grown indoors, these plants grow relatively slow. They become severely pot-bound, and that causes them to grow a lot slower. And if grown indoors, they rarely produce maybe 1 or 2 leaves a year. But grown outdoors, these plants, when they send up new leaves, kind of come up in a circular rosette fashion, and that tends to make up for the slow growingness of this plant. And when the leaves kind of come up, they call them a break, as they all come up like in a circular kind of rosette fashion, but you'll see them kind of unfurl like fiddleheads of a fern, but you'll see come up in maybe rows of 6 or 4, and they'll unfurl, and they'll be kind of soft and malleable, but over the next couple of weeks they'll continue to harden up and get more stiff, and then when you bump into them, they kind of don't really move a whole lot, and they'll get thicker and be able to kind of poke you. So be careful if you do have these plants in a high traffic area, because people can get all poked up and cut. But you do kind of want to put one of these guys off to the side where they're not going to be visited or frequented a lot by a lot of traffic, because somebody could get cut or hurt by these tough leaves. Now, the Sago palms do hail from the Old World tropics, anywhere from Madagascar on up to Japan. So you'll kind of want to consider these environments whenever you're deciding where to put your Sago palm. Like I said, they do like a lot of bright, indirect light, If you keep them outdoors, you'll want to make sure that they don't get a whole lot of light. I'd say anywhere from about 6, maybe 8 hours of direct sunlight a day, but during the harder part of the day, you'll want to make sure that they do have a little bit of protection from the direct sunlight. Amount of morning sunlight is ideal, and then protection around noon on up through the rest of the day will benefit your Sago Palm. They do like a lot of direct sunlight, but they don't like a ton of it. So like I said, if you could give them a little bit of a blind or a curtain to kind of filter a little bit of that light out during the harder part of the day, then that would be ideal for your palm. Now, as you can see, I have mine kind of grown in a clumping fashion. So I do need to repot him. They don't like a whole lot of water, so you don't really want these guys in a plastic pot like I have mine in. But I was moving him a couple of weeks ago and he dropped and cracked him a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in this next terracotta pot with a drainage hole in the bottom, and that really will benefit him. As we know, terracotta pots are porous, so that'll help wick any water away from the root mass, and that consequently will actually help keep your plant thriving longer. Like I said, these guys don't like a whole bunch of water around the roots, so if you can wick some of that away and let the rest of it drain freely, that is ideal for your plant. Usually I'll let Mother Nature water this guy, but if it's gone about a week, I will stick my finger down in here and try and see if I can feel if it's got any moisture at all. If I don't feel any moisture down to the first or second knuckle, then I'll probably go ahead and give them a little bit of water. Ideally, when you water, you want to give them a decent watering and then let them dry out in between. So I'll give them a good deep water of about 3 to 4 cups of water a time, and then after that I'll let them dry out, and then I won't water them again for about a week, just depending on the temperature and the light that he's getting before I figure if he needs any more water. And as I know, you guys will probably come for me in the comment section, but I do have a mat below me and a bucket to catch any of this detritus or debris that's inevitably gonna fall down below when I'm repotting. So I went ahead and added a little bit of soil on the bottom. I just used the Miracle-Gro Cacti and Succulent for palms and citrus to kind of anchor down the bottom or the bed where the roots will rest for the plant. And then I will go ahead and set him on the ground and then pull him out of his broken pot down here. Now be careful when pulling your palms out because they are root bound. They do have a nice kind of thick root system, and as you can tell, I've got some crabgrass and some purslane coming in here as well. Now these guys don't have huge roots. They are pretty thin, can get somewhat thick towards the bottom, so that does tend to cause problems if they become too pot bound. Next I'll take my root rake and then my pruning shears, and I have my chopstick here too, along with my isopropyl alcohol that I'll use to sanitize any tools that come into contact with any of the plant at all. And now you can tell that I've got him out and he's pretty considerably root bound. So I'm going to take the root rake and just kind of start hacking all this root mass down here. Now I know you can't see right now what I'm doing, but I'm just ever so slightly taking my root rake and just raking through all this debris and the roots. Now you don't want to go too hard. You just want to pull a little bit to kind of separate the roots out. Some of the roots will rip, and that's fine. But basically, I'm just trying to loosen all this stuff up because he's had considerable growth around the roots over the last couple of years. So I want to get out most of this soil and then free up these roots that have encircled the bottom of the pot. Now whenever you meet a little bit of resistance, just pull a little bit. You don't want to pull greatly and then pull out a bunch of roots. Like I said, you'll break a couple. That's to be expected. But mainly I'm just worried about freeing off a lot of this debris on top. So as you can tell, I'm just kind of getting in here and freeing up some of this debris and these roots, and mainly just trying to separate a lot of these weeds out from the top of the plant. And like I said, I've kept a bucket underneath me and a mat to catch all this debris. So if you're doing this indoors like I am, Make sure you're going to plan for all this debris to be falling, because I have. And just take your time. You don't have to go too fast. And with this crabgrass, if you pull, it will end up coming out and leaving the roots in, and then you'll get more crabgrass in a couple of weeks. So make sure you take your time pulling these roots of these weeds out. But really all you want to do is free out the roots from the bottom, so that as it comes into its new pot, the roots are able to kind of grow out a little bit. If you left it all root bound and tied up as I had it, it wouldn't be able to grow too much more. If left unchecked, the plants would fully encase the roots and then choke itself out. And then if you have to, just take your little chopstick to kind of get in here and sift through the roots of the weeds. And then when needing to, just pull him back up here and then hold on and use your chopstick to kind of free out the rest of these other weeds in here. Now I had him in a 8-inch pot, and now he's going in a 10-inch pot. And like always, you don't want to jump up too many sizes when repotting a plant. Maybe 1 to 2 inches. If you really go too many more over that, you run the risk of stunting your plant. Your plant will end up doing one of two things, and usually they'll try to focus more on developing their root mass when left in a huge pot, instead of developing new stems or new branches or new leaves. And then the other thing that they'll end up doing is probably drowning themselves out. If they're left in too big of a size pot, they're never able to absorb all the water that's down in the root mass, and they'll end up drowning trying to sift through all that water. So it's best to keep them in a smaller pot size instead of jumping up considerably. And then, as always, I say you want to kind of look your plant over and see how the roots look. These plants don't fall victim to very many pests or diseases. That's one of the reasons why they've been around so long, is because they're quite resilient. So while you're down here, just kind of take your time and look over the roots. You kind of want to look out for any discoloration, anything that may be black and mushy, or that may have a rotted smell to it, that may tell you that you have root rot in your roots of your Sago Palm. Ideally, you just kind of look for a uniform color and consistency, and if all seems well, I will go ahead and start trimming all this up so he'll fit into his new pot. So you want to cut off as much you can from the bottom, and then around the sides too, to make sure he's got enough room to fill up his new pot for the next couple of years. As I said, these plants are really slow growing plants. Hopefully he'll be in his new home for about the next 3 or 4 years. And I'll probably cut off about 30, 35, maybe 40% of the root mass. Doesn't look like it, but I know that once I start to examine it more, I'll be like, well, a little bit more than I wanted. But like I said, I don't prune the roots too much on this guy, so a little bit won't be too bad. I took that cacti, succulent, and citrus and kind of stuck it in the base of the pot. That way it has something to rest on. And I'm going to compress it just a little bit more. That way it sits further down in the pot. And all you got to do is just take your finger and make a little divot, and then push the soil up on the sides of the pot. That way it forms a little bowl for the root mass to kind of sit in on. And then next I will take my bonsai soil and fill it in. Now this is Tiny Roots. This is not sponsored at all, but I really love the Tiny Roots Premium Bonsai Soil Mix. It's got that Akadama clay and other nutrients that are perfect for any serious bonsai grower. That allow the moisture to kind of filter down and through the roots of your plant without actually kind of staying around and really saturating the roots. Alright. Not that I was going to take the whole bag. Hopefully it won't, but I'll take my most versatile tool for a bonsai grower and use my chopstick to kind of push a majority of this down through the pot and around the root mass. You don't want a whole bunch of air bubbles kind of sitting down in there around the roots where it can wreak havoc on the plants. So just take your time and with your fingers kind of compact it and press it down, and then use your chopstick to kind of force it down the rest of the way the best you can. And really all you want to do is just make sure a majority of its roots, if not all of the roots, are covered up by the soil. I guess I spoke too soon. And just kind of fill it in. Any roots that are left exposed with this severe heat wave that we're having will end up drying the roots out and potentially killing part of your plant. So just take your time, make sure this all fills in nicely, and you don't see a whole bunch of roots kind of sticking out. You want it to all be covered up. And plus this premium bonsai soil from Tiny Roots really makes it look spectacular. I love the way it looks. Alright, this rubbing alcohol is getting on my nerves. And just make sure it looks kind of even. Alright, now the only other thing I have to do would be to water this guy and then make sure I cut off these dying leaves here. Like I said, sago palms don't really have much in the way of pest. The only thing I know that they struggle with is scale and mealybugs. Now, one of my master gardener teachers that I used to have had one, and he was telling me that he had a problem with scale on these sago palms. Now, ideally, if you have a problem with scale, you want to set your plant outside and let the natural predators of the scale come in and do their job and remove all that. But if that doesn't seem to be working, he said what he did was take a lot of spent coffee grounds that had already been used to make coffee, and he went to Starbucks and asked them if they had any spent coffee grounds that they were willing to part with, and he said they just gave them to him. So you can go to Starbucks, ask them if they have any that they want to get rid of, and more oftentimes than not they'll be happy to just kind of give them to you. But he said that with the spent coffee, he just took the little coffee bags that they came in and applied them around the cones of the sago palms, and then used other coffee ground bags to place at the base of the plant. And now these little bags that the coffee grounds came in actually ended up holding the coffee grounds closer to the pot of the plant for a long time. Instead of just throwing coffee grounds on the plant, it actually held it in place. And then he said if you have a whole infestation and plants, you just want to look on the top and the bottom, and if you see a bunch of scale on there, remove any of the leaves that are severely infested. And then he said that within a month or two he had new leaves emerging that didn't have any pest on them at all. So if you have a problem with scale on yours, you can use coffee grounds to help combat that. But if you don't want to go that route, if you feel like yours is too much of a problem, then you can actually use a systemic pesticide to fight the scale off as well. And then I said also that you can have a problem with mealybugs, and if you do have a problem with mealybugs, you can use a strong blast of water to spray them off of, or take pruning shears and remove any of the leaves that are infested, or you can use neem oil or rubbing alcohol and go over the tops and bottoms of all the leaves. But more often than not, if you take your plant and set it outside, natural predators for the mealybugs and the scale will come into play and help you out for free. Now, these plants wouldn't have been around for 280 million years if they had so many problems. Now, I know that the only real problems these guys have is discoloration for their leaves. So if you notice that your leaves are starting to turn yellow, you may have a couple of problems with it. Now, if odor leaves like mine are starting to turn yellow, but the rest of the plant is green, you may have a problem with a nutrient deficiency. And that nutrient deficiency might be nitrogen. So like I said, if the tops of the rosettes are green and a deep green, and the bottom leaves look like they're all starting to turn yellow, that's probably a problem with your nitrogen. Now, if you notice that the odor leaves are starting to turn yellow and the midrib is also starting to turn yellow as well, this tells me that that could probably be a potassium deficiency with your leaves and your plant. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these spent leaves that are brown or yellow. These dead and dying leaves will never regain their green color, so you might as well go ahead and cut them off. And then hopefully, if you're able to address the nutrient deficiencies, the newer green leaves will emerge green and have a deep green color to them. Now, if you notice that some of your leaves have a banded look to them, to where they appear green and yellow, but the center leaves actually look kind of green, this might be a problem with magnesium deficiency. Consequently, if you're having problems with any of these deficiencies in your plants, try to get a well-reputable plant fertilizer to feed your plant. In the spring, I'll wake mine up with some fish emulsion, and then once a month or once every other month, I will fertilize with a palm fertilizer. And coincidentally, whenever you're looking for a palm fertilizer, you want one that contains 3 times as much nitrogen and potassium as the phosphorus. Another reason why these leaves could be discolored could be inconsistent watering. Maybe one week you're giving it too much water and the next week you're not watering at all. You really want to be consistent when you're watering these guys. Like I said, they don't need a bunch of water. So when you water, make sure you give them a long, deep drink and then let the excess water drain out, and then kind of use your finger to get down in here and see if you can't feel any moisture at all. Ideally, you want the soil to dry out basically completely before you go in and give it more water. And then with watering in the wintertime, you make sure you want to cut that back as well. These plants do go pretty dormant, so if you're not living in zones 8 to 10, these plants don't grow outside. They can take a light frost, but not for too long, maybe a day or two, but if it gets down too cold, the plant can die. Ideally, these center stalks are a tough wood, so they probably will be okay in a light frost, but if it gets too cold for an extended period of time, you can lose your plant. Make sure, if you have yours in a pot, that you keep yours indoors, and if you're not sure, always set an alarm so yours won't die if left outside. Now, if you do live in zones 8 through 10 and you have yours outdoor and you know yours is going to experience a cold draft for quite some time, make sure you give it some protection. Put some mulch around the base of the plant, and if need be, cover it up to make sure it doesn't get frost on the delicate fronds. Like I said, most often than not, if it's just 1 or 2 days, the plant will be okay. You may lose a leaf or two, but like I said, if they turn yellow or brown, make sure you cut that off, and your plant will be fine. But just always make sure you wear gloves whenever handling these plants, because they are toxic. You don't want to get any kind of sap or anything around your eyes or your mouth or ingest any of that. And then the last problem for discoloration of leaves would be pest. Like I said, they really only struggle with mealybugs and scale. So just kind of look your plant over anytime you come outside and you water it, or anytime you do some avid pruning or transplanting like I did. Also, you'll make sure that you want the pH of the soil to be slightly acidic, on up to acidic. Anywhere from around 5.5 on up to 6.5 is ideal. These guys do like acidic soil. And as always, I want to give a special shout out to my top tier tree patrons like Thuyen. Thank you. I'd also like to give another shout out to my other patrons like David and Heather. If you were interested in supporting my channel through Patreon, please check the link in the description box below. As always, the money goes to keeping the lights on, the LEDs running, the humidifiers going, and all these plants with fresh water. If you'd like to see new videos with newer plants, please donate below. As you know, being a plant daddy is expensive. And we have cats too. Alright guys, well this has been Justin reminding you that if you can, go out and plant a tree. Let's reforest the world. And while you're at it, leave me a comment and let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures with any of the Sagos, king or queen. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.